And on behalf of Decoding Dyslexia PA, we welcome you to our first Decoding Dyslexia Parent Series webinar titled, Why is My Child Struggling to Read? Just some housekeeping items before we start. Your line is muted. However, if you have a question, please submit them in the chat box to the DDPA host. Also, if you could include your child's age along with your question, that will just help us frame the answer. And we will try to get to as many questions as we can at the end. This webinar is being recorded, so everyone who registered for today will receive a link to the recording for later viewing. The webinar will be presented by our own Decoding Dyslexia PA colleague, Yvonne Duva Howard. We're also joined by additional DDPA colleagues with various backgrounds and expertise to help answer questions. You'll see on our screen our disclaimer. We wanted to share our disclaimer before we begin. And again, this webinar is just to inform you that it's not a replacement for any legal or medical professional advice, and the information presented is just for informational purposes and to raise awareness for dyslexia. Decoding Dyslexia PA is a grassroots movement driven by families concerned with limited access to educational interventions for dyslexia within our public schools. You can see on our screen that's our mission statement. Thank you very much for joining, and I will now pass it over to Yvonne.
Hi, thank you very much. Let me present myself in the view box here. Hi friends, thank you Teresa very much for a fantastic introduction, and thank you to the panel and audience for joining us today. This webinar is the first in a series, and the goal is to provide insight and suggestions. There are multiple reasons why a student may struggle to read, and this discussion is going to focus on dyslexia. So today's agenda, we will discuss what dyslexia is and dispel several common myths. Then we will present a broad overview of the critical elements for effective instruction, followed by suggestions for next steps. Before concluding, your answers to your questions will be provided by our DDPA panel. So submit those through the Q&A chat option. And finally, we will ask you to complete a post survey, and that's going to help inform our future webinars. So what is dyslexia? Literally, dyslexia translates as difficulty with words. Not all children who struggle with reading or has difficulty with words will have dyslexia. For example, there may be an underlying speech and language disorder leading to challenges with stringing words together to make sentences. Another example may be a lack of exposure to formal education because it has not yet been provided. So many children pick up things from the world around them, while others require intentional instruction. Certainly, these examples you see might lead to struggles with reading, but not all struggles are rooted in a specific reading disorder. So what do we know? Dyslexia occurs worldwide. The prevalence is dependent on the inclusion and exclusion criteria used to make that determination. To account for the variability, the Decoding Dyslexia community has adopted a conservative range of 10 to 20% of the population. And within the population of individuals who have already been identified with a learning disability, 80% are likely to have a reading disability such as dyslexia. So you can infer that struggling with reading isn't all that uncommon. The International Dyslexia Association, also known as IDA, has shared a comprehensive and mutually agreed upon definition. So the primary areas affected are phonemic awareness, decoding and fluency, which in turn might restrict vocabulary development, background knowledge, and overall comprehension. Dyslexia is genetic in that it runs in families, but the combination of a genetic factor plus weak early literacy skills are the strongest correlation with developmental dyslexia. Therefore, looking for signs early on with struggles with reading can allow you to intervene as soon as possible. And I would gather that's why you're here today, is because you have some questions, and we hope to answer those for you. There are fascinating talks about the brain and dyslexia. For an in-depth conversation or explanation, I would encourage you to look up the researchers as those cited here. Also, Nadine Gabb and the experts at Haskins Lab out of Yale University have been conducting fMRI studies and MRI studies, not just looking at the differences between brain structures, but also to show that the brain after interventions, the brain of an original dyslexic individual mirrors that of the non-dyslexic brain. So that is incredibly promising. For our discussion, we're going to keep this a little high level. So what you're looking at is the left hemisphere, and we're comparing the primary brain regions that are activated during reading. Note that this is not the brain at rest, it's actually during a reading task. So in typical development, there are 3 dominant areas of the brain that are activated. You can see that on the left side. In contrast, the dyslexic brain is relying heavily on the left frontal lobe. And you can see this area here, Broca's area in orange, it's larger because it's working overtime to articulate and connect sounds to letters. So we know the brain is a superhighway that requires involvement and recruitment of many regions. So one area of activation is likely to lead to struggles. And the absence of brain activation during reading tasks supports the definition that we just talked about from the IDA. For some individuals, reading and writing, it seems to come so naturally, but in reality, reading and writing are not natural or passive processes. In literature, you will hear about the science of reading, and that in part is because we have to rely on the brain. It works as like I said, a superhighway. So reading and writing both require complex neuronal processes. Also, these skills require a systematic approach to facilitate greater brain activation linked to skilled literacy. It's quite a complicated process, actually. So what does it take to be a proficient reader? Literacy competence embodies and integrates a multitude of skills you can see from this list. So let's start with phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is the ability to identify, hear, and manipulate phonemes. A phoneme is a single unit of sound that has a meaning in any language. In the English language, there are 44 phonemes. Each represent a different sound pattern. But there's only 26 letters in the alphabet, that's right. So sometimes letter combinations need to be used to make a phoneme. Let's try. So how many phonemes are in the word cat? If you thought 3, you're correct, yay. But what if you change just one phoneme? Let's say you change the C to a B. Yeah, now you have bat. So depending on the context, that background knowledge in your vocabulary, it might mean bat as in to swing with a bat, or it might be the animal that you see here in the picture. So how about something a little more challenging? I think it's a little challenging. What about the word ball? How many phonemes are in the word ball? Yes, if you said 3, you're still correct. So just a reminder, the letter is not the phoneme. It's the sounds of the letters or the combinations of those letters, the sounds of those that create a phoneme. So for ball, you see on the bottom, it's B, A, W, L. So notice it's A, W because those letters work as a unit to create a sound aw. In addition, identifying words that rhyme, separating words into syllables. Those two are examples of phonemic awareness. Back to our list. So phonics is the letter-sound relationship, and the relationship to accurately read a word is referred to as decoding, so it's breaking the word down. And letter-sound relationships, building them back up, or spelling is called encoding. So essentially, decoding is the input and encoding is the output. Fluency can be thought of as the rate. So for example, the rate of reading a nonsense word, real words, and eventually paragraphs. There is some debate about fluency as a standalone goal. After all, proficient readers may have to even slow down to read something as technical as a neurology chapter versus People magazine. So there are differences and different rates at which you read things. Therefore, fluency can be viewed as an ability to read words and strings of words with automaticity. And then we move to vocabulary. Vocabulary refers to understanding and using words. So in the pre-reading years, and I think I mentioned this before, vocabulary can be gained by all the spoken words, whether it's through people talking back and forth with us, or even the things that we hear in the background. And also, particularly, people reading to children is a way that vocabulary banks get larger and larger. Once a student approaches a school age, vocabulary continues to grow. So you get that through the ongoing conversations in your class with peers, people with different backgrounds, and the text that we're reading. So reduced reading experience can limit the number and type of new words learned. And therefore, this limits background knowledge. So vocabulary then can be tied to comprehension. So when reading is a struggle, the meaning can get lost. So context clues and pictures are a really fantastic strategy. On the flip side of that, relying on context clues can sometimes camouflage a bigger challenge. And so once books become less picture-based and the vocabulary is less common, comprehension challenges may become more apparent. It should be noted that comprehension challenges alone are not characteristic of dyslexia. However, it should pose a question about possible underlying challenges with reading or a language learning difference, such as a specific language impairment. And these can coexist. Lastly, we want to talk about attention. So we need to have attention because we need to focus on the lesson presented to us as well as the materials that are presented to us. So those are the components. And here's another view of those components. Reading is not limited to the act of reading. This is one of my favorite images, and it was created by one of my favorite literacy experts, Hollis Scarborough. You might see different versions of the reading rope, and I encourage you to take some time to look this over. Perhaps use it as a checklist to see where your child might struggle, or what sub-skills are really strengths, definite strengths for your child. I like to print this out and share it with my school teams. It's a really great way to not just provide a resource, but it opens up eyes for some people who may not realize that all of these components are truly required in order to present with skilled reading. The take home here is that both word knowledge, such as decoding and phonological awareness, and language comprehension, such as vocabulary and background knowledge, have to work in tandem to arrive at skilled reading. And again, you can see the sub-skills in here are those that we have just discussed. To build onto the reading rope, we are viewing the stages of reading. This might look complex at first, and it's a reminder that reading does not just happen. So what you see here are the core reading systems. You'll notice some from the reading rope, plus the mental systems, including language and cognition components, for example, attention and memory. And these skills start off separate because they're sub-skills that are often needing to be taught explicitly, though they do intertwine. So in theory, these sub-skills will work together in an almost seamless manner as we progress through the stages of reading. And this is true for reading and the output, which is writing and speaking. As you've heard and seen, there's a lot involved in becoming a proficient reader, and a breakdown in even one area can result in compounding struggles. So what struggles have we been told that people report to us? What struggles have we seen as a decoding dyslexia community? And what struggles are you noticing? We have a list of some of the common challenges. And at this point in our lives, it's likely that you've been home with your child and you may be noticing a couple of patterns that either your teachers have reported or you hadn't noticed in the past. So these characteristics listed are not exhaustive and they are not diagnostic on their own. However, if your student has multiple struggles, further investigation is definitely warranted. So in theory, catching a student in the early years is best. Early screeners are becoming more readily available. And Decoding Dyslexia, as well as other advocacy groups, we're advocating for mandatory kindergarten screeners. Right now, Pennsylvania does have a pilot program that's running, and the outcomes thus far are quite promising. So the take home here is that when these symptoms or characteristics persist, ask questions. The fact that you are taking part in this webinar may already indicate that you have some questions. So thumbs up to you. All right, so what I would like to encourage you to do is to note some of the challenges that you might be seeing at home or at school. And we are not able to provide you with a suspected diagnosis, but we want this to be an opportunity for you to brainstorm and connect some of the dots with the points that have already been thrown out. If you are listening to this live, we're going to move on. But if you're listening to this in replay mode, then I encourage you to pause this and jot a couple of things down. When speaking with others, you might hear the term dyslexia, but you might also hear terms such as specific learning disability in reading or reading disorder. It's important for you to know that the Department of Education had issued a statement a few years ago informing stakeholders that if the diagnosis of dyslexia can be used, there's no reason that it can't be. And in fact, utilizing a label such as this can guide interventions and eligibility for students. So does that mean schools can use the term dyslexia? Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, there are no laws that mandate that. So this is, I think, where we're finding parents are finding challenges, is advocating and educating their schools. This is something that you can do. That letter is provided at the end of the slideshow. And so you can print that out. It's by UDIS. And so you can print that out and you can bring that to your schools and you can let them know that there's no reason these terms can't be used. So to recap, a learning disability includes dyslexia, and it might interfere with one or combination of skills. Mathematics surprises some people, but think about it. Numbers are symbols and can be challenging. For example, we have multi-digit calculations, time sequences, and word problems are among a few. There are some common and overlapping differences that might impact reading, such as attention, writing, and math. So we talked broadly about what dyslexia is and some of the characteristics. There are a lot of myths and misunderstandings surrounding dyslexia and reading challenges. So let's be mythbusters and dispel a few. The first, dyslexia is not a visual issue, nor is dyslexia an inability to hear. Dyslexia is not a reflection or a result of intelligence. Dyslexia is not due to an unwillingness to learn or laziness. So saying try harder or take more time, it might not actually work if the individual does not have the tools to use during that extended time. And dyslexia is not an absence of abilities. In fact, if you've ever seen a list of well-known individuals with dyslexia, you'll find Albert Einstein, Whoopi Goldberg, and many talented inventors, athletes, educators, actors, artists, entrepreneurs, you name it. Your child has many strengths and talents, and I'm sure many, many interests. So let's reveal those and celebrate those. Take a moment to recognize your child's strengths. For some, I can understand that facilitating a virtual learning or feeling as though you've been suddenly thrown into the task of homeschooling might become frustrating at times. Just a little. So if that's the case, this is definitely a good time to recall your child's strengths and consider how to incorporate those strengths and talents and abilities into your child's everyday learning and general activities. So my youngest is an active child. I'll leave it there. And he has many strengths. But I let him stand or I let him spin in his chair while he's doing his work because it actually seems as though he can attend better and is less resistant to the actual work. So I figured that he doesn't have to work so hard to keep his body still, which frees up his brain space to do other things, like add mixed fractions and uncommon denominators. So now that we have some background, what's next? I have to tell you, it breaks my heart that some students have been described as lazy or not willing to do the work. By now, you know that is not the case. So if someone says this to you, definitely ask more questions and dig a bit deeper. Decoding Dyslexia and other groups are making headway at a legislative level to work with universities, educational programs, and providing rigorous instructions in teaching the science of reading for dyslexia and other learning disabilities. So in fact, if you go to our DDPA website, you can read a proposed bill by Mr. Houlihan and see that there have been many successful programs put into place. And that's to the credit of the advocacy work that people have done. So if someone, again, is saying these words to you, it's your opportunity to educate and advocate because you too can make a difference. So listening to this information, you may continue to be concerned that your child struggles with reading, and those struggles might be a result of dyslexia. So there's a few suggestions. Well, there's lots of suggestions, but I'm just going to throw two out for right now. The first is to meet with your child's teacher, even if that means virtually, and ask to see some test results that have been conducted in the past and some benchmark scores. So if you're concerned beyond that, I would suggest that you recommend a psychoeducational evaluation. And so that's a mouthful. Some people just say a psych ed eval. And so I would recommend that you seek clarity and try and get to the root of your child's struggles. So who's qualified to make a dyslexia diagnosis? The school might be telling you one thing, the pediatrician another thing, but your gut is telling you something too. So there's no federal law that makes it clear who should make the diagnosis, and there isn't one pure test for dyslexia. So an educational psychologist is the most sought evaluator, though other psychologists and speech language pathologists may also be qualified. So when you make the request to your school, educational law makes this evaluation free to you and to your child. So it's best to put your request in writing and copy that to the chain of folks, from the teacher, the principal, the special education director. After you make your request, the school has 10 days to provide you with a permission to evaluate form. So that's a form that they'll probably email to you, and the letter simply says that you give the school permission to start an evaluation process. So there's a whole time frame laid out in the law. I'm unclear. I don't have any personal recent experience with how the current school closures will affect that. But I did recently read a letter that the timeframes are, they stand as is and can be worked out between the caregivers and the school. So I encourage you to look at the Rights Law website, which we've included in the resources, for timelines and procedures. This is just, excuse me, this is some key timelines in the school age special education system pre-COVID. And like I said, I believe those still stand. But talk with your schools. So from the day you make a request to the determination of whether your child meets special education eligibility criteria or not, it could take 90 days or more. So it's suggested to get the ball rolling. And in the meanwhile, your student continues to need effective instruction. So what is effective instruction, and what might that look like for a child, excuse me, who's struggling to read? I thought it was over my cough. According to the 2019 Nations Report Card, 2/3 of fourth graders are not proficient in reading. There's a saying, if a child isn't learning, change the way you're teaching it. At least I think that's a saying, or maybe that's just my own personal philosophy. But the most effective way to teach an individual struggling to read and spell is to use a multisensory approach. In fact, a multisensory approach has been shown to be effective for most learners. So this webinar gives a bit of a teaser because we want to give you a couple of ideas. And we do have an upcoming webinar that we are looking to dedicate to multisensory instruction. And we will announce that date once we have something in place. So you'll hear the term structured literacy, and this contrast with balanced literacy. So structured literacy brings me to Orton Gillingham. You may have heard of Orton Gillingham, which is a structured literacy methodology. There are several packaged evidence-based programs listed. So this is not an exhaustive list, and it's recognized that there is a no one-size-fits-all. So you're encouraged to take a deeper look at these and consider if there is a match for your student. So individuals from different school districts and teachers and students and families and caregivers have reported on like Facebook, right? If I get my message, if I get my information from Facebook, I should be careful, I know. But some people are saying that they are not receiving individualized special instruction. And the Department of Education issued a letter in March stating that special education can be provided virtually. So again, talk with your schools, look at these programs and see if you can come to the table and meet your district in the middle. There might be something else that can work for you and for your student. So a structured literacy program incorporates specific elements that are critical for success. So take some time to look at each of these important components. And if you have specific questions, feel free to ask in the Q&A chat box. I'm just going to scroll through these so that you can take a peek. And they're pretty much self-explanatory. Okay. So trust your gut. Skill deficits prevent children from blooming as readers, and that's a concern. At this point, feel free to submit questions if you have any from things that we've already talked about or maybe spurred some thoughts in your mind. We are going to move forward with some practical and hands-on activities that you can do at home. So there is so much to share, and we want to provide you with intentional chunks of useful and practical information. So throughout the month of April, Decoding Dyslexia Pennsylvania has posted bi-weekly activities that build on language and reading skills. So I definitely encourage you to check that out because you'll see some more details there. And then in the attached survey, let us know if it would be helpful to demonstrate hands-on activities so that you can watch those or we can maybe do some live interactions with those. But to get you started, here go a few ideas. Okay, so these are a couple of ideas, and they, again, these are not exhaustive either, but some fun things that you can do tonight to get you started. So the first, in phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. So one idea, I like artwork to include that in learning activities. So I like, especially in the spring, is making little circled caterpillars with letters. And your children can blend those together and segment those and mix them around and create some fun words and some nonsense words too. Another favorite, I've been sitting home eating a lot lately, and so letters, cookie letters from Trader Joe's. So those are fun also to manipulate those around and create words, and then maybe eat the vowel in the middle and replace it with a new vowel and see what kinds of words you can make. If you are not inclined to eat cookies like I am, then maybe Scrabble letter tiles could be fun too. Or you can simply just write letters on pieces of paper. That works as well. And then some rhyming games. There are lots of great rhyming games. So perhaps playing a thumbs up, thumbs down game. So you start the game by saying, if the word rhymes, give me a thumbs up. If they don't rhyme, give me a thumbs down. So make sure your young learners, the examples are obvious. So cat, dog. Well, they're in the same category, which might be confusing, right? Because they're in the same category, but if your child's working on rhyming, they'll know that cat and dog don't rhyme. So this game is fun. It incorporates body movement and builds on listening attention as well. So some other ideas for rhyming you can incorporate for during charades or drawing or hangman. You can use rhyming words or sounds like as a hint. And again, these games overlap with a multitude of skills and they can be played 6 feet apart. You can even do the thumbs up, thumbs down while you're preparing your meals and your kiddos at the table. So that is a fun way to keep your child engaged. And for me, I am always grateful of things that buy me time. Let's talk a little bit about phonics. So a couple of phonics games. Well, there's a lot of phonics games. So maybe something like making words. So you would need magnetic letters. Or again, you can use this on the refrigerator with magnetic letters. You can use Scrabble letters. You can write your own letters. You can do a variety of things here. But if you have tangible letters, you can put half the consonants in one bag, vowels in the middle, and some more consonants into a third bag. And then have your child pull a letter out from each of the bags and see what word that makes. And then you can put them back in, mix them back up, do it again. You can even do things where you're deciding if these are real words or nonsense words. You can maybe keep the consonants on each end and just change the middle vowel. Or there's a lot of different ways that you can play around with that. And again, this game is multisensory and can be played with others, building on relationships, like social relationships with siblings even. That might be fun. Vocabulary. One of the best things to do for increasing vocabulary is read aloud to your child, speak with your child, narrate what you're doing, talk about your day, talk about the environment, elaborate on things that have happened and explain those. Some other fun things to do are acting out words such as charades or even drawing games are a lot of fun. And for some other hands-on activities, hot potato could be a pretty fun one. So you could play hot potato with synonyms. So you choose a word and then you pass the potato along the circle so everybody can think of words until they're stumped. So for example, the word cold. So you say cold, and then the next person you pass the potato says freezing, and then chilly, and then hopefully I'm not the third one because I would be out of hot potato really quickly. But some other versions you can play with this is you can do prefix and suffix. You can do rhyming. You can do opposites. You could do categories. You can do starts with the first letter. So there are all sorts of fun ways that you can play this hot potato type of game. How about fluency? So again, fluency, we're talking about working on rate so that reading becomes automatic. One of my kiddos, ever since he was little, he likes to read in different voices. So he might sing his story, he might use an accent, you can use a mouse voice or a cowboy voice or a monster or a princess voice, and just have fun with repeated reading. Actually, when you add that melody and rhythm, what happens is you're really recruiting another area of your brain, and so it helps with the skill. So that's a really fantastic and fun, I think, fun idea. Another thing you can do for fluency is you can record yourself reading, or your child can record him or herself reading a passage, and then play it back as they read the passage along with their self-recording. So that, again, might be a lot of fun for a student. And as they're listening to it, they might notice that there's something that didn't seem quite right. And so that's a really good way to get that biofeedback, to check in on and builds on, will help build on that overall comprehension. So comprehension is the next area. So thinking out loud is a way that we can build on comprehension. So when you read aloud, talk to your child about what you might be thinking. This is your opportunity to show your children that reading isn't, again, it's not just the act of reading, but there's a lot to figure out beyond the words. So describe how you feel about what's going on in a book, or talk about what might happen next, what you thought about the character, what you think that character might look like. How do you envision that character? That might be interesting because you might have different ideas. That happens sometimes, right, in real life, as you read a book and you have this vision of what a character might look like, and then a movie comes out and you think, well, that person doesn't look like anything like I thought they would. Or you might think, wow, they look exactly like I envisioned it. So this is another great way to just build on the actual, the global picture of that. Another thing you can do with comprehension is the before, during, and after components. So if you're reading fiction or nonfiction, before reading, pull out the title and the author and look at the picture on the cover or the words on the cover, and come up with some predictions. What do you think this book is going to be about? What do you think might happen? And stop during the reading, and you again can draw on the characters. Are they doing the right thing? You can look at headings and chapters, and again, see if you can make predictions, see if you can forecast, foreshadow, all sorts of ways to throw literacy skills in. At the end, you might ask your child to retell you the story, or you might ask for their opinion on something. What was their favorite part? What was it mostly about? And would you recommend this to a friend? Another thing is you can ask why, so that you can kind of relate the story back to something that happened in their own life. And we know that when we add meaning, that memory increases and the overall experience becomes a little more rewarding. So I think we could probably go on and on with lots of examples, but I'm going to leave it at that for right now. And before we wrap things up, again, there is a lot of research out there about what dyslexia is and what dyslexia is not, and evidence-based instruction, what that looks like, and builds on the science of reading. So today we've covered the basics, and as we progress through our webinar series, we will get deeper and deeper into these topics. As a gap appears in, our hope is that we can advocate for early identification and early intervention, basically. But we can really, and in theory, you can identify everybody, but we have to have trained individuals to provide a systematic and structured instruction. And we hope that you'll be part of that. You have this great opportunity to advocate and tell your story and let your voice be heard. Decoding Dyslexia and other parent groups exist so that you can do just that. So please visit our membership page on the DDPA Facebook page, or the web address included at the end of the resources. And we hope to see you there and hear your stories. This is the survey. And for those of you who are registered, I think you have to be registered to be on this. You'll receive this survey and a webinar link in a follow-up email. Here's a little sneak peek of some of our upcoming webinars. The IEP is one that we often get a lot of questions about, and it can be confusing. So we will talk about how to interpret the evaluation report, how to ask for an evaluation, what the whole process is like. And we're really hoping that we have a panel member who has talked about providing a seminar on the Orton-Gillingham approach. So there are a lot of great things slated. At this time, feel free to enter your questions in the chat box. And as you do that, I just have 3 more little slides. First is a thank you. And then here go some of the resources that I mentioned throughout the course of this webinar. So take a peek at these in addition to works that have been referenced. And I think that you will really learn and grow from all of these. So if you have not already, please feel free to enter your questions in the chat box. All right, I'm going to turn things back over to Teresa so she can lead us and our panel in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Yvonne. Awesome. We do have some questions coming in, so let's jump into those. First question was, earlier in the presentation, you said the schools can use the word dyslexia. Does that mean that my child's IEP should list dyslexia as the disability category? We do have a person on our panel, I think, that can probably field that question. Her name is Jessica. I'll let her start there, and then we can open it up to any additional comments from the rest of the panel.
All right, so for that question, under the IDA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the law says there are 13 disability categories that are listed on there, and that is what the schools will use to identify your child's disability category for the IEP services. And unfortunately, at this time, dyslexia is not one of them, so they will often not use dyslexia as the disability category, even though they can list it in the IEP as a diagnosis.
Great, thank you. Okay, awesome. Next question. My child, who is a 7-year-old kindergartner, has an IEP for dyslexia and dysgraphia. Since COVID-19, there has been little to no IEP supports, so no OT, no speech, no reading instruction. Do we have any recommendations for at-home learning programs for his age? He's very advanced in math. Um, I can probably, let's turn this over to Jackie, who's on our panel, and then we can open it up to some of the other panelists as well, if they have any additional comments.
Hi, Teresa. Hi, Yvonne. Thanks, and everyone for joining us. I feel your pain without the supports, but please know that your kindergarten teacher and the special education teacher would probably be the first people that you should go to ask if there's any type of activities that you could do online or paper pencil or large motor skill with your child. There's so many different websites that are out there right now that have free resources. In our April newsletter, we did note 2 of them. Decoding Dyslexia in California has a great website with lots of different activities listed. And also Common Sense Media has a website called Wide Open School. They have a multitude of activities. And Nessie.com actually has a specific one for children who are dyslexic. So you could check that out, and always stay in touch with your child's teacher.
Perfect. Thanks, Jackie.
You're welcome.
Okay, next question. Yvonne, I think this is a speech and language question, so maybe you can field this one. Recently read that speech and language pathologists are another professional area besides the neuropsychologists who can diagnose dyslexia. Do you find that to be true?
Yes. Diagnosing dyslexia is in the scope of practice for speech language pathologists. However, it should be understood that every speech language pathologist has a different skill set. And so some may not feel like that is their skill set. And so ethically, they can't go there. But yes, if you have a speech language pathologist who has the expertise and background in literacy, yes, it's in the code of ethics and scope of practice.
Okay. We have just a couple left. Next one is, what is the difference between a reading disability and dyslexia? I thought maybe Jackie or Yvonne or Jess could probably field those. We could probably supplement that with some different comments.
Okay, I'll go. It's Jackie. I'll go
Sure.
ahead and comment first. So there may not be any difference at all, but it might be that some kids have missed that window for development in their reading skills, and they've fallen behind. And with systematic, explicit instruction, they're going to catch up. But a child who has dyslexia is not going to catch up because theirs is actually a difference in their brain. It's a language-based learning disability. And I think at that point, I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne.
Okay, great. Thank you. I thought that was a great explanation, Jackie. So dyslexia is the primary reading disorder. And I think where things get a little bit challenging is there can be a coexisting language disorder on top of a reading disorder. And so that is where things get a little bit foggy. And you'll see it would be called a specific language impairment. And the reason reason why things get a little bit murky there is because at the fundamental level, there's a lot of overlap. So for example, like phonemic awareness, phonics, these, when children start off with also vocabulary or comprehension that's a little bit behind their peers, and then they start reading, it's sometimes hard to tease out whether the challenge then is because they already started off with a language difference, or if it's because they're not picking up, for example, vocabulary words because of a reading challenge. So there's a lot of testing that can help to tease that out. And there's a bunch of research out there that actually shows, I think it's about 55%, somewhere between 17 and 55%, there's an overlap. And again, that just kind of depends on what the criteria were used in those research studies. But that's, yeah.
Great, great, thank you. Probably have time just for a couple more. When do we know when the webinars will be coming out? We don't have specific dates. We hope to be putting one out within the next couple months, but we would advertise that via all of our social media pages, Facebook, our monthly newsletter, Twitter, our website, and Instagram now. So I would stay tuned and watch the social media sites, and we'll be sure to advertise as soon as we have a date set. And we have one more question. My second grader has dyslexia. What should be the priority in terms of teaching at home? Our online learning is not live or videotaped, which isn't ideal for a child who does better with encouragement and face-to-face interaction. That is certainly for sure. I think that probably ties back to the earlier question, Jackie, that you fielded about the COVID-19 with little to no IEP supports at home, and probably reaching out to your teacher and asking which ones maybe to focus on or prioritize, kind of quote unquote in that teaching at home scenario. Let me open it up to the panel if there's any other comments there that anyone else would like to add.
This is Yvonne. I'm going to add, sorry, Jackie. I'm going to add something here. There are a lot of apps as well as online programs out there. Understood.org put out a list of 14 different online evidence-based reading programs that are run online, so you don't need the actual hands-on person there. Again, they're evidence-based and they are a version of the face-to-face interaction. And so I would encourage you to look at that list. I don't know if it's on our DDPA page, but I had provided a synopsis of those different programs. So you can look at those because something like that might work for you, and that may offer your school a great idea. They might be thrilled that you have this solution to come to the table with. So there's that. And then there's also a variety of apps. So I know it's hard, they're not necessarily evidence-based, but if you're feeling like your child can benefit, I say go with what works for you and what's exciting for your student, because the bottom line is I think you don't want that gap to get wider and wider, and you want to keep your child motivated. So there are a lot of things out there, is the point. Jackie, you want to add?
I was just going to add in and say, with some of the free resources, I mean, knowing that dyslexia often originates from a lack of or a deficit in phonological awareness, you might want to hop online and look at Heggerty phonological awareness. They have a lot of free resources on their website, or if you went to YouTube and just put in Heggerty phonemic or phonological awareness, you'll come up with lots of different teachers teaching lessons. And I guess you could specifically look for a second grade teacher with the lessons. just to help build on their phonological awareness skills.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, and we have one more before we probably wrap up. Does dyslexia affect high school students? Who wants to field that one? I mean, obviously, I can start. It certainly does, right? Dyslexia is not only you will not see it only for small kiddos, but you'll see it obviously from small kiddos all the way up through adulthood. I think the key there is looking for those characteristics and those common challenges when they're young, for that's the window of opportunity to try and provide intervention as early as possible. But the characteristics and challenges can be the same, or obviously some different ones as students age into other grades and move up through school. Does anyone have any other comments that they like to add there?
I think I would just say that, sorry, Jess, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Dyslexia is not going to go away. It's kind of like vision issues. They don't disappear. We just learn different accommodations to try to help ourselves to, get your brain activated. I'll go back to Yvonne's lovely brain slide that showed how we can get this side of our brain activated when this side's not working quite as well as it needs to be, but the dyslexia doesn't go away. Go ahead, Jess, sorry.
And what I was going to add to that is that it's not uncommon at all to have a child go all the way through school and get to high school and realize, at high school level, realize that there is an issue and maybe even get the diagnosis of dyslexia. As Yvonne shared in the presentation, kids with dyslexia are just as smart as other children, and sometimes even more so, and they become very adept at a lot of times at social skills and people skills, and so they're very good at, and I don't want to use the word manipulative because it sounds bad, but they are very good at using their skills to get by undercover. And so it may be as easy as borrowing, schoolwork from peers, or, copying the answers to homework from their friends, or using humor to deflect to not answer questions in class. And there's a lot of different things that dyslexic kids will do that when they get to high school, somebody may then may uncover that they have dyslexia, and it has gone by all these years unnoticed because they're smart and they are able to develop these adaptive coping skills in an effort to get by undetected.
Can I add a little to that? It's
Sure.
Lisa.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. I would also like to just add that it's never too late to work on some of these skills. So even that high school student that's gotten that far, relying on their, what I call workarounds, if you do notice that there's a problem and you think it's dyslexia, I always encourage people to do their own research so you know what to say when you're talking to the school. But it's never too late to help them with some of those skills that they can help with reading, for example. Also accommodations that they may need at that point if they're unable to keep up with a lot of the classwork in other classes. They may need some extra help in those areas. And then the last thing is the the importance of keeping that self-esteem up. Sometimes these kids have no idea the nature of why they were struggling, and they do tend to, as Jessica said, they get into some of these negative behaviors trying to cover up for some of those struggles. So sometimes just knowing what dyslexia is, explaining it to the person, and finding those strengths is the best thing that you can do for those older students, adults even. My husband is in his 50s and just recently realized that he's dyslexic. So when he looks back on his early schooling experience, he says, oh, you know what? Turns out I'm not dumb. And then to uncover all those strengths, it really means a lot to those people.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, that's all we have time for today. So I want to close up our webinar. Thank you all for joining. I hope you found it informative. I hope you found some key takeaways to take back with you and share with others. Thank you to our DDPA panel for our question and answers, and Yvonne as well for hosting today. And please look forward to other webinars in the future. So thank you very much. Have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.